Springs with Novel Excursion. So this is a new thing we're doing. We just started on Monday, where we're going to be doing live travel schooling lessons. Every time we come into town or go travel, we'll schedule it and post it on our Facebook and Instagram and all the different social medias, and we'll post it out on our mailing list. So definitely go click and subscribe so you can get updated on that. But today we're here in Leon Springs, which is about 10 miles just to the northwest of San Antonio, Texas. And it's a small little town that is notable for stagecoaches. So it was founded based on a stagecoach route that came through this area. So Leon Springs only has about, as of I think 2000, it had 100 people here. So there's been a lot more development now. It's a lot bigger, but it's really just a small little area that has significant historical and cultural value. So we're going to get into the lesson now, and I'm going to get behind the camera and do a little bit of instruction. So feel free to jump in if you want to join our live chat. Feel free to request it, and maybe we can bring you in when there's a good time. So I hope you enjoy the lesson, and let's get to it. All right, Sarah, so we are at, you can look at the building, you don't have to look at the camera. So we're at, can you hear me? Yes. All right, we're at the Max Owl Stagecoach Inn in Leon Springs. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it's A-U-E. So Max Owl was a German immigrant that came to the area back in the 19th century. So Leon Springs, in 1846, it was the site of a stagecoach stop operated by George von Pleve, a German nobleman and immigrant. It had a post office by 1885, and the town had a steam cotton gin, a general store, 2 hotels, and a population of about 50. And as I said, it was a population of 137 as of the year 2000. So Max Owl was actually awarded 640 acres in this area in 1852 for his services as a Texas Ranger. And the building behind, or the building in front of the camera right here, what you're looking at, Sarah, was actually a stagecoach stop on what was called the, I'm gonna remove the expletive, it was the donkey stagecoach route. So it was one of the early stagecoach routes from San Antonio to San Diego, California. Hey there, Melissa, thanks for joining us. We're talking about stagecoaches here in Leon Springs, which is about 10 miles northwest of San Antonio, Texas. Hey Sarah, can you hear me? Okay, cool. So we talked about Max Owl, who was basically the founder of this building. Hey, little man. All right, Bubby is waking up from his nap, so he might chime into this lesson a little bit. Hey, Sarah, what is significant about this building that we learned about last week, or not last week, on Monday? What is it made of?
It's made of limestone.
And what is limestone?
Limestone is a structure of compacted shells and from living creatures from the ocean, and it needed a lot of heat and pressure to make it.
Okay, and what kind of rock is it? Do you remember? Starts with an S. Sedimentary.
Right.
Sedimentary rock.
With a C.
No. So sedimentary rock, it's very prominent in this area. We have a lot of quarries, right? And we're at Crown Ridge Natural Area on Monday, where we were learning about how limestone underneath us makes for a good area for the aquifer, right? What is the aquifer called here? Do you remember what the aquifer is called here? Edwards Aquifer.
Right.
Okay. All right, so let's go back into the stagecoach talk. So, all right. So, back in the 1800s, so this is 19th century, around in the 1850s, there was stagecoach transportation. This was before the automobile. This was before trains, before planes. Okay, so this was the primary mode of transportation at the time. And stagecoaches, for those of you who don't know, is, you can see it in a bunch of old Western movies. It's one of those that has big wooden wheels, 4 wheels, and it's drawn by horses typically. Some were drawn by oxes or different cattle. But the ones here were typically drawn by horses. There was one major route in the early 1850s from essentially the Gulf of Mexico through San Antonio to San Diego. And that was the way that goods and mail were transported across the continent. So typically, stuff would come from the East Coast via ship, and it would be downloaded in Galveston. And then from Galveston, it would board a stagecoach and be transported west, okay? So what happened that was significant in 1858 was called the Butterfield Overland Mail Stage. So going from Galveston to San Antonio to San Diego typically took about 52 days to get mail and goods that far, moving by stagecoach. So that was a very long time. It takes us, if we go from San Antonio to San Diego, I think it's about 10 hours driving. That's a pretty big difference, right, Sarah? Hey, look over here so we can talk. I know you're taking notes, you're into this. Okay, so yeah, that's a big difference, 10 hours versus 52 days, right? But what the Butterfield Overland Mail Stage did was it optimized stagecoaches at different stops along the route. So about 160 miles were in between stagecoach stops from St. Louis all the way to San Francisco. And what they would do, they would have stagecoaches at each side, and they would have a unified timetable where stagecoaches would leave eastbound and one would leave westbound. So instead of going 160 miles, how far would they go if they met in the middle? You divide that by 2, right? So how far would that be?
160.
160 divided by 2. What's 16 divided by 2? Oh, we're going to do the math here. Someone's learning long division in her math studies right now.
I can actually do this without doing long division.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of easy. So.
What, do you have the answer?
What?
What's the answer?
It should be 53.
No, close. It's 80. 80 miles, right? 16 divided by 2 is 8. So, and then you add that 0. So 80 miles. So each stagecoach would go about 80 miles, and then they would meet in the middle, and they would pass over mail, goods, or personnel, whatever it is that they were transporting. And they would all operate on this timetable, and it would happen 24 hours a day. So people would just be constantly going. And one of the sayings at the time was, let me see if I have it. I can't remember what it actually was, but the basic slogan was, "Nothing will stop the U.S. mail service." And that was in recognition of all the obstacles that these mail persons and the stagecoach operators had to deal with. So there were Native Americans that didn't like settlers at the time, so there was a lot of conflict occurring. There were a lot of issues with these roads because they weren't paved like the roads we have nowadays. So like the one you're standing on right now is a paved road. That isn't what was customary at the time. It was all dirt trails. So typically what happens to dirt trails when it rains?
It all gets scattered.
It gets muddy, right? It gets muddy and it gets flooded, especially here in San Antonio. So imagine driving a heavy cart that's made of wood with wooden wheels through mud. It probably wouldn't work very well, right? Yeah, so I'd slow it down quite a bit.
Be very hard because the wheels would get wet and it would start to break apart probably because wet wood, not very good.
Yeah. Okay, so what that allowed them to do was they could move a piece of mail from St. Louis to San Francisco in 25 days. That is over half the time, or less than half the time that it took originally on the San Antonio to San Diego route. So that was equivalent. I know you're too young for this right now, Sarah, but for us, we had dial-up internet. Your mom and I had dial-up internet back in the 90s. And for those of you who are old enough to know, you know what that sound is like, just sitting there waiting for it to connect. That was so slow, and now you have immediate connection. You have broadband, you have Wi-Fi, you have all that. So that was the difference between the two stagecoach routes. That was the equivalent. So that speed change was huge. It was a dramatic difference. And that was all because of a unified timetable and these various stops that were scattered across the West. Do you understand, Sarah? So that's why we picked this area today to have this lesson, because this very spot behind you was one of those stagecoach stops. And the Butterfield mainland route actually looped down into Texas to bypass the Rocky Mountains and avoid that harsh winter and the snow. So that is the way they were able to operate 24 hours a day all throughout the year and get mail across the United States quickly. It's pretty cool, huh?
Yep.
Hey Matt, thanks for joining us. We're talking about stagecoaches and the mail service in the 19th and early 20th century. So all this was pretty significant at the time, but by 1888, the railroad started. Oh, did you have it, John?
Yeah, I made a little
Okay.
veil.
Okay, cool. So by 1888, we started seeing railroads spanning the continent, right? Spanning the United States. So do you think a railroad was faster, a train is faster than a stagecoach?
Yeah.
Probably, right? So initially, the stagecoaches were able to stay in business because the railroads weren't touching all the places they needed to touch, and they were actually having a lot of technological difficulties getting them up and going in a reliable manner. But ultimately, by the time hey, are you listening? All right. Ultimately, by the time of the turn of the century, into the 20th century, when we got into the 1900s, railroads were a lot more efficient than stagecoaches and a lot more reliable, and that's why we stopped using stagecoaches. Ultimately, what did we move to from railroads? We still have trains, but what did we get? Do you remember? What? What do we use now?
Automobiles.
Yes, airplanes and automobiles, and those are definitely faster than a stagecoach, right? But it's a cool way to think about how people used to get to and from and get things across the world, or across the country. I think it's important for someone your age, Sarah, to understand how slow things had to occur before you have some of the things you have now. Because you send mail, right? What do you send mail for?
Pen pals.
You have pen pals? And how quickly do you get your mail? Let's say you have a pen pal in Houston, right? How quickly did you get your mail?
Maybe in a couple of days, about a week or so.
Yeah, just a couple of days, right? So that's from Houston to San Antonio. You can get that probably in about a day or two. But you can get mail all the way across the country in just a couple days as well, depending on how you send it. You could even get it overnighted because you have planes and automobiles, right? But imagine, back in the 19th century, you would have had to wait 25 days to get mail. That's almost a whole month. That's a long time, right? So if you wrote a note to your friend, it would take almost a month for them to hear your answer. And then it would take another month for you to get their answer. So by the time you wrote it, you can't remember what you did a couple hours ago. How are you going to remember what you wrote 2 months ago? You're not, right? Crazy, right?
Unless you make a copy for yourself.
Well, back then there were no copy machines, so you would have had to write it out. So you would have had to make 2 copies on your own. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, especially if you want to say a lot to your pen pal.
All right, so I think this was a good lesson so far, and we're probably going to cut this off today. I just want to give a couple notes about San Antonio, some interesting facts that I think would be interesting for you, Sarah. So most streets we do talk about, you know who I love the most, right? Romans, right? I'm a big Roman history buff, so I love the grid patterns of Roman cities. But the law of the Indies was a big thing that actually Amanda just taught me about it when we were on the way here. So the law of the Indies is what San Antonio was based off of. So that was a way that the Spanish crown essentially managed how cities were built when they were settling the New World. So they had a certain construct, certain parameters by which they were made. So typically there would be a military fort, there would be a plaza, there would be a church on the plaza. Everything would be centered around that church. And typically there were grid-like forms of the streets, so grid-like patterns, so kind of like boxes, right? Do you understand what I mean by a grid, right? Okay.
I know what a grid is.
Okay.
Because it's like tic-tac-toe.
So part of San Antonio's Old Town has that pattern. However, what was different about San Antonio was that it was settled in such far reaches of New Spain at the time that they relied heavily on existing Native American trails. So what ended up happening was most of these roads, when they were developed, they followed the same route, so they radiate out from the center of the town, out from where San Fernando Cathedral is downtown, right? So they radiate out kind of in a, you know what radiate means? Like the sun's rays, right? Going out from the center, okay, in different directions. And they're all named after different places that they were going to. So like Goliad Street went to Goliad, or Laredo Street went to Laredo, right? So San Antonio doesn't have numbered streets. They don't have numbered streets or lettered streets that are unified in any given order, which typical cities do. San Antonio, on the other hand, has those streets named based on either where that street was going or after important Texas figures. Like,
I don't know, maybe
Crockett?
Yep.
Davy Crockett?
I was trying to
There you
remember
go.
his first name.
All right, cool. So I think this was a great lesson, and I think this is a good place to stop. We're gonna head over to, if you've seen the sign there, this property is actually, it has been preserved. Unfortunately, it is not open to the public, but it is managed by Rudy's Barbecue, which is a fantastic Texas barbecue joint, and we're gonna go pick that up now before we go pick up Amanda.
Yep.
All right, so before we head out, I just want to let you know we have a lot going on with Novel Excursion. We have our mailing list where you can get a free family travel packing list if you go over there and sign up at novelexcursion.com. You'll get that, you'll sign up, and it'll send you over to the page where you can download it for you and you can print it out. It's a great little packing list. It helps you travel minimally so you can save room for souvenirs, and you can travel with less of a hassle. So you don't have to take a lot of luggage. You can take carry-ons only, and you take the bare essentials, bare necessities. And on that page also has some of our expertly crafted tips and tricks for what you can do when you're traveling. Other things we got going, we have our new book that we just published 2 weeks ago. Do you remember what that's called, Sarah?
San Antonio Guide.
Explore San Antonio, your culture guide to educational and service-oriented travel. That is available on our website at novelexcursion.com/shop. It's also available on Amazon and Lulu. You can get it ebook or print copy. You can get it printed only through Amazon. If you go directly through our website, you'll get two versions. You'll get an EPUB version as well as a PDF version. All of this comes with a free travel guide. Free travel guide for San Antonio, which is a 5-day itinerary built for San Antonio. It gives you accommodation recommendations, where you should stay, where you should go, how you should spend your time, and then it also gives you recommendations on where you can serve and how you can give back to the local community in San Antonio. So you'll get that free. It's a $41 value for only $9.99. The printed version is $13.99, pardon me. And you can get that, as I said, on our website, Lulu, or Amazon. We also have our cultural excursion, Explore San Antonio Cultural Excursion, coming up in December. Registration is open on our website, and you can find that through the Travel With Us tab up on our menu. Registration is open. We're expecting to host it in December. Hopefully, we are abiding by all safety precautions for COVID, and we have a policy in place that will assure you a refund in the event that the event gets canceled. So I ask you to go check it out if you're interested in coming to San Antonio in December. It's a great time to come. We have lights up on the Riverwalk. It's a festive time, and we'll take you on an immersive excursion led by yours truly, Amanda, and the star of the show over here, and our little crying bubby over here. And we'll take you through the city, help you learn from the community, and then ultimately give back to the community on our volunteer day as well. If you like our content, definitely click subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. We will be posting this later today. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Novel Excursion Travel, on Twitter and Pinterest at Novel Excursion. Come join in the conversation at facebook.com/groups/Novel Excursion. And as we say here at Novel Excursion,
Don't forget to travel mindfully. Bye.
Thanks for stopping by.